that this actually can increase your self-value because you love and respect yourself enough to go, I'm not a machine and I will work to the fullness of my capacity, but I'm not going to burn myself into the ground. That doesn't make you a failure. That doesn't make you weak. That actually makes you a lot stronger and more respectable. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Lead from Love podcast. I am Yalini. I am your host and love coach. Now, in today's episode, we are talking about burnout. We're talking about what it costs you when you do too much, especially over a long period of time, and how it impacts your health, not just your mental health, your emotional health, but also your physical health. And sometimes we are going through these intense periods and we go out and we seek help. We don't always find the solution that we want, especially when it comes to mainstream health. And we're here to let you know that you are not going crazy. There is something going on when you are not feeling right. I've got a special guest today called Alenka Kyslik, who's going to walk us through what goes on in our bodies when we are burning out, how to turn things around, the way that you can start tuning into yourself to pick up on the warning signs so you don't have to go through this roller coaster of feeling better and then crashing, as well as an exciting new solution that she is creating to make support easier for people to access all around the world. So welcome, Alenka. It's so exciting to have you here. I know that you've had your own personal journey going through burnout, going through it for, over 15 years as an overachiever, and then having to go through your own personal journey of physical pain and suffering and finding your own solutions.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here and really looking forward to talking about this subject. I'm very passionate about it, and it hits closer to home than I think I would like.
Yeah, amazing. Because I think a lot of us can relate to, especially in this day and age of being an overachiever, having ridiculously high standards, the pressure to feel like you need to be able to do it all on your own, especially as a woman. If you've got kids, you've got to be able to look after the kids and the home and your work and still be a good partner. How did overachieving show up for you?
Yeah, I think I didn't realize it in the moment because it's just, how you live, right? When you're used to doing something a certain way for so long, you don't realize what it is that is causing some sort of an outcome, right? And for me, the outcome was feeling burnt out. And I didn't know the name for it until I spoke to a few different professionals. And then I started to understand, like, oh, this is what's happening in my body. And to kind of add to what you're talking about, physical and mental health, something that I've recently heard that really stuck in my brain is that our brain is an organ in our body. We don't treat it that way. We treat it like this other thing, and it has a lot of stigma around it. But ultimately, if we're not taking care of it, just like we don't take other parts of our body, it's not going to do so well, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to keep that in mind. But overachieving for me looks like a mix of things, of thinking that my value is only worth the things I was able to create or do, right, in terms of work or take care of other people. It also mixed in with people pleasing, right, and not respecting my body when it said it needed a rest and pushing through. And it's okay now and then to do that, but if that is your default all the time, eventually something's gonna crash, right? There's that saying that if you don't take a break, your body will take it for you. And we can all relate to that in like school context, right? I think is like the most relatable. You finish your exams and you all of a sudden get really sick, right?
Yeah.
But that's like a shorter term, a semester is like a shorter term thing. But if you think of it in the work context, that builds up over time. And if we don't find ways to listen to our body, which for me, I was completely disconnected with mine, then we're not able to understand, like, oh, maybe I'm grinding my teeth during the day. That's horrible. And I should figure out what am I thinking about before that happens or while that happens, and not judging myself for it. Maybe, I get really tight shoulders. What happened during the day that made me all of a sudden have a tight shoulder or neck that night? What are the things that made me really anxious, right? What was going on? Who were the people I was interacting? What types of conversations were they? And just starting to see those things without judging them, without being hard on myself, for me was kind of the first step in understanding, okay, this is what is causing it. And that can help me kind of start to work through it. And it's a long process, but that was for me some of the first steps.
Yeah, right. I love one of the first things that you led with, which actually took me a little bit by surprise, because I don't think most people would consider this a part of overachieving as much as just achieving. And that was
Mm.
having to, your values, you had to do things to feel good, to feel like you achieved something. We've got to tick certain boxes
Mhm.
of, I accomplished all of these tasks and I got all of these errands done. And because if we're not achieving anything, then aren't we just being lazy? Isn't that what we're supposed to do with our day?
Yeah, and you're right. I feel like that's like a really hard one too. It's a hard thing to balance, but our bodies are not built to be machines, right? Or they need rest, otherwise we wouldn't sleep every night.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's how you rest and recover. Because as you said, when we're doing too much, once we stop, we crash and we get sick. And that often happens when, I speak to so many clients where they've gone, I've been working so hard. I'm really looking forward to that holiday. It's the light at the end of the tunnel. And then we reconnect once they're back from holidays. It's, how did you go? How was it? Did you enjoy it? And they said, spent the whole time sick. And it's almost a surprise as though,
Yeah.
why is it that every time I stop, my body gets sick and you feel like your body is punishing you? But actually, it's saying, I've been pushed so hard for so long that the first chance I get to breathe and to recover and to rest, I'm going to take it. Sometimes we work so hard and we think that once we get the holiday, that's when we can relax. That's when we'll
Mhm.
feel better. But it's a reminder that we need to
Yeah.
rest and recover on a daily basis, because when we're busy
Mhm.
dealing with the deadlines that we have for work and the pressures that we have at home, all of the attention your body needs to heal, to keep you alive, to keep you functioning, starts to build up. It takes a toll. And so the moment you stop, it goes, okay, now we need to look at this high blood pressure that we have and this issues with your digestion because we're so stressed that we're not digesting our food properly, and we're run down, and so now we're going to get sick to try and pull these pathogens out.
Yeah, it's so great. It's so fascinating to me. I've seen this in so many different ways in my own body, but I was put on digestive enzymes by a naturopath, and she was like, "Hey, you're going to be on this." And then like 6 months later, I was fine. I didn't need it, but like it depends on where you're at. And I was really stressed at that point, right? Like, and I think we see this through in different things, but like, I made an effort to work and like eliminate some of the stress in my life, which has helped me in so many ways. And I feel like it's one of now I'm starting to be more attuned to it 3 years later. So nothing happens overnight. But I think
It's a
it's really
journey.
important for us to understand that, like it pushes too hard. I mean, I'll give you example for me. I went on a trip because I could finally move after chronic injuries. I burnt out, and then I hurt my ankles, and then I kept hurting them. And then I was finally in a good place. And I was like, I'm going to go on a trip when I'm going to be active. I miss it so much. And I pushed myself too hard. And I didn't hurt myself during any activity, but I was hosting too many people and I was working too late. I missed a step and I broke my other foot. And I had spoken earlier that day and the day before with a friend of mine, and I said, "Hey, trip has been amazing, but I can feel it. I've pushed myself too hard. I did too many things. I'm really tired." And then I missed a step on the staircase, right? Like it was nothing fancy, and I broke my foot. I immediately knew I had done something wrong, but it was just a very real reminder that I needed to take it slow. And this, I feel for me now, I'm starting to see it happens over and over again that, those moments you miss a step or you aren't paying attention. Like the other night, I was really stressed and I was taking my earrings out. I dropped the backing. Now I don't know where it is. Like these are things that if I wasn't so stressed, if I had given myself a break, it wouldn't have happened. And I see the pattern now. I wouldn't have seen it later, but I think those examples look different for everyone, right? Like those, the busiest mornings are the ones you spill your coffee kind of idea. Those
Yeah.
things happen to people all the time, right? So how can we try to get that rest or slow down or not try to do so many things, or, the dishes will be there in a couple hours. It'll be fine. Whatever it is.
Well, I love the examples that you used around missing a step or losing the backing of your earring, because I feel like when we think about burnout, most people think
Mhm.
about when you were just on your back. You physically cannot
Yeah.
get up. You do not have the mental capacity to think. You've got brain fog
Mhm.
and your body's carked it, essentially. We don't often think about all of the other more subtle ways that it shows up, like missing a step when you walk, forgetting what you were doing when you walked into the room, not being able to pay attention to something because your mind is elsewhere. We often think of those as things of, oh, you're just being clumsy, or you're just not paying attention, or you're just a little bit distracted,
Mhm.
as opposed to those being signs that there is so much building up in our minds that we're missing simple things. Our body is not operating and it's not noticing a step that you need to take because you are that
Mhm.
distracted.
Yeah, and you have so much going on. I will say I was at that point of burnout 3 years ago, right? Where I couldn't get out of bed. I could barely feed myself. I did go through that. But now, what I've learned for myself, and this shows up differently, right? Like everyone's brain works different, but it is those little things that you're mentioning. And so for some people, they can fathom that, and other people are like, well, this is just, no matter how good I'm doing, how relaxed I am, this is how my brain is. So it's important for me to just say, it depends on what is your normal. And unfortunately, a lot of our normals is actually like way overstretched. And it's important to understand that
Yeah.
as well. And it's a very complex thing. And getting, I am not a mental health professional. I am just someone who's gone through some things and have learned things and tried to, like, to your point, explain things in a way that hopefully is accessible and people don't feel
Yeah.
alone and they understand, like, this is maybe just a phase in my life and I have to get through it and it's going to be different and better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to get through it, it has to get better. There have to be some changes that are made.
Mhm.
I'm curious,
Yeah.
when you said that you had been down that path of absolute burnout
Mhm.
in the way that we typically would imagine that, did you
Mhm.
notice that you were on your way there? Did it take you by surprise where you woke up one day and it was only in hindsight that you realized you were burnt out?
Yeah, I didn't think it was. I think one of the things that like really hit me towards the end of it was I had such extreme brain fog that I couldn't, we were talking about like value in being a producing human. I couldn't write emails. I could barely show up for phone calls where normally, it's very easy for me to be the one showing up and running it. Um, and I couldn't do things like properly have the energy to cook or even do more than open a bag of chips kind of thing. Uh, and I didn't
Right.
realize it at the moment. I thought I was just exhausted. And it built up over time and over years. So it got progressively worse and worse over years. I won't say that I saw it coming because I don't think I did. I don't think I saw it coming until it was too late. And my body quite literally shut down and said, we're done. We're not doing this anymore.
And so, what were the stories that you were telling yourself along the way when you had a little bit of brain fog, when you had certain challenges? I guess the reason I'm asking is because a lot of us, especially these days, expect our bodies to work like machines. I've just got to get through this day and I've just got to get through this week and I'll be fine. And we just expect that we get to make the decisions around when we're operating and when we rest, and we expect our
Mhm.
body to follow.
Yeah, I don't think I wasn't aware of what was going on. And I think thought if I just kept on pushing, if I just got the thing done that my boss expected me to, if I just continued going on, it would be fine. I didn't have a narrative that in retrospect made any sense, like going on in my head. Now I know knowing what I know, you almost override. You're like, are you serious? This is what you're thinking? Like that this was okay? Like I thought it was normal. I thought what I was going through was acceptable on some level. because you're also telling yourself that, like, well, it's been happening for so long. Why all of a sudden is this not okay? Like, if I could handle this for 6 years,
Yeah.
why is now the moment that it's crashing down? And it to me is just really fascinating because we tell ourselves things to keep ourselves give ourselves sanity, right? We create narratives in our head, and you see this in lots of contexts that say, like, hey, if I only do this, it'll be okay. If I only get through that, it'll be okay. Oftentimes it's not. But if we tell ourselves that, we can get through another day. It's hard. It's really brutal, and I feel really bad for that version of myself.
Yeah, I think it's something a lot of people can relate to. And thank you for sharing that you didn't know it was happening at the time, because I think that's the reality for most people. We don't know what's going on inside of our bodies until it forces us to pay attention. And it's only when it's really cost us that we learn the lessons of how to tune in, because we don't want to go through that experience again. And a lot of us are living with a lot of pressure when it comes to paying the bills and keeping up with the responsibilities at work and at home. And so we almost have to tell ourselves that narrative. I just need to get through this day. I need to just get through this project or this milestone to keep pushing us forward. But like you've experienced, we're not machines. And, 6 years, 15 years, that's a long time to keep pushing yourself. So I can see how you would think, that's just how I operate. My body can just operate at this level. That's how I'm designed.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so fascinating. So it was 6 years with one boss, but yeah, 15 years of my career, right? And just now learning that, oh no, I can say no. And I can not do this thing, and I can manage my time in a way that allows me to rest. But yeah, like this took my whole adulthood to figure it out. It didn't happen overnight. And I think, to kind of your point, like, when you don't know what's going on, that's okay. And being hard on myself, which was my default, right? Saying, like, well, why didn't you do this today? Why didn't you do that? And kind of beating myself up for it constantly. I would have friends catch me and they said, like, you can't do that. You can't, like, beat yourself up for it. It's not helping. And there's really fascinating science behind why it doesn't help. But unlearning that has been a really big part of growing into a place where I am, actively trying to avoid it, avoid burnout.
Yeah. Well, because you're not living from a space of burnout. It's the exact opposite to what you're trying to achieve. So when you did reach that point where you couldn't operate the way you were operating anymore, what process did you go through to start healing and to start making some changes for yourself?
Yeah. The first thing, and I think one of the most important things, and I really truly believe this, is leaning on my community and the people around me. I had friends who would do things like check in and just be there to listen and send text messages like, hey, I'm thinking about you. Our community, we are humans, require community and connection, right? And so being able to ask for help and knowing that you are not helpless is really powerful. And that can
Yeah.
look different to everyone. And it is really hard to learn what your needs are in those moments as well. But being able to say, hey, I need help with getting out of bed today, or I need help with making sure that I eat properly today. Whatever that looks like for you, it looks different for everyone else. Like, everyone functions differently, but being able to ask for that help, I think, is so essential.
Beautiful. Yeah. And I think sometimes it's a thing that we're scared to ask for, especially when you're a high achiever and you have all these expectations on yourself. You think, something as simple as, I need help eating well today. We feel like, as a
Yeah.
grown adult, we should be able to feed ourselves. We shouldn't be asking for things like that. But again, that's what a community is for. And we're not here to do this life
Mhm.
alone. Okay, great. So you started asking for help from the people around you. And I'm assuming you also
Mhm.
sought help from health professionals.
I did. Yeah, I had different health professionals, some more helpful than others. What
Yeah.
was really interesting for me in the middle of burnout was some health professionals were, or one specifically was like, "Hey, you know how you got here, so you just need to figure that out." And it was the most useless piece of advice I had ever heard in my life. Like I didn't know, otherwise I wouldn't have gotten myself there. Like it's just, I know it was
Wow.
intended well, but it just really put the blame on me and felt really horrible.
In the sense that they said, oh, well, you've burnt out from doing too much, so just do less. Was that the interpretation?
No, it was more of you let yourself be abused by this boss, and you know why that happened. So just figure that out.
Oh, wow. So now you just
Yeah.
automatically know how to say no, how to have boundaries, and how to share how you're feeling.
Yeah, not helpful. I
Yeah.
had another
Okay.
mental health professional say, like, you're not ready yet to work through this. And when you feel like you are, you can reach out. And that was much more helpful, being able to have someone say, understand where you're at in that moment. Because I think for a lot of us, we want to get better and we want to make the steps to get better. But really, what we need is relief. We can't push ourselves to get better. It's like if you break a bone, you need to let it heal before you start doing physical therapy. And we don't think of it that way with our minds, right? We need to allow
Mm.
ourselves to heal and rest before we can start learning what we need to do to unlearn whatever habits got us there, to do better, to set boundaries. And so that mental health professional was really wonderful. I had to see a dentist for my grinding teeth because that was out of control. I saw a lot of different types of people to help. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, one of the things I love the most about the feedback that that health professional gave you is it's the reverse of being the overachiever. Sometimes we carry that personality trait even in our healing journey. It's, when you're at work, you've got to do absolutely everything. You have to push yourself and you've got to tick all of the
Mhm.
boxes. And then when we go through healing and rest and recovery, it's the same thing. Okay, I've got to make sure I'm doing all of the things to make sure that I'm feeling better. So I've got to see all of these people and do all of these practices. And I need to meditate and I need to be mindful and I need to be grateful. Whereas sometimes it's stop, just do nothing.
Yeah.
Lie in bed, read a
Um,
book, just stop.
yeah, I cannot emphasize how magical naps are. Highly recommend a nap anytime.
Yeah. Did you
Yeah.
struggle with guilt as you were taking naps?
I was it almost wasn't a choice at that point. Like it was so
Right.
bad um, that I couldn't conceive the energy to do anything except for rest.
Okay. Which in some ways is the silver lining.
But I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean that was a silver lining, I guess. But you can feel guilty for not doing, like, I felt guilty for not doing a lot of other things, but I learned to be kinder to myself and not beat myself up so much.
Did you ever feel like, and the reason I ask this is because, particularly for a lot of women, I know that this is a common experience when something is not right in their body and it's not an obvious symptom like a growth or a scab or a wound, especially when it's emotional and they go out and they seek support and they're told things like it's just in your mind. You're fine. You're making it up. You're being dramatic. There's nothing wrong with you. And we walk away knowing inherently that there's something wrong within us. And when we go out to get
Mhm.
help, we're made to feel like we're crazy.
Yeah.
Did you ever have an experience like that?
Um, Not related to burnout, but yes, absolutely. This is the second part of the medical journey I've been on, where I stepped off a curb about a year after I had that really horrible burnout, and I tore apart my ankle, and I immediately knew it was really bad. It was like a golf ball sized swelling within like 20 minutes. And I went
Oh,
to, they call it urgent care here, to get checked out, and the receptionist, everyone's like, "Oh, here's a wheelchair, here's an ice pack." Like it looked really bad. Like let's help you. I go in, I get an X-ray. They're like, oh, it's not broken, it's fine. And the doctor gives me the lightest of the light braces because now I know the difference between all of them. He's like, well, if it doesn't hurt, you're fine. And I was like, no, this is like, should not be this swollen. Like, I know this should not be, this is wrong. Like, I've sprained my ankle enough times, unfortunately, I know. So because of a broken finger, which is another story, I had an orthopedic surgeon, and I'm very grateful that I have the right insurance to have access to that, right? Because that's a whole nother thing. And I get in there and I said, I want an MRI and he's like, well, I don't know. I'm like, no, this is like, but I knew what to say at that point because I'd been through enough of it. I said, this is a chronic issue. It's happened over and over again. I want an MRI. MRI comes back a week later. Oh, yeah, you're going to need to have the weight off of that foot for 2 to 3 months. Absolutely no weight on it. The protocol entirely changed for what I needed to do. Before that, it was like, oh, yeah, I walk on it lightly. It's fine. Just be careful. You've not to get like too far into it, but I had torn apart a couple of ligaments. I had smashed my bones together and caused fragmentation. There was bleeding in the bones and there was tendonitis. Like, out of all of the types of ankle sprains I could have done, that was the worst of them. And if it hadn't been for me pushing to get an MRI, I would have never known what that's like. And I can give you examples from like ovarian cyst issues farther back in my past where that I believe was also caused from like a stressful, toxic environment, where I couldn't get answers and I couldn't get an MRI or an ultrasound for that when it happened. And I spent 3 days in bed in pain, not being able to get up because it was so awful. But yes, medical gaslighting is a serious issue that I do not have enough 4-letter words to express my full frustration. It's awful.
It's sad because when we reach out for help and we don't receive it, this is one of the reasons that we stop asking and we start shutting down. Yeah. And then the vicious cycle of burnout and being isolated continues. Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm so glad that you at least had a community of people around you that could support you when you burnt out, that you had some of the right health professionals around you as well. So apart from the ankle injury, which I hope you stayed off and fully recovered from.
I did.
When we go back to the challenges you had with burnout, what were some of the things that you learned to help you tune into yourself? What were the warning signs that you were able to pick up on so you knew when to rest, you knew when to slow down? Or was it just that your body didn't bounce back the same again and so you were tired more frequently, which meant you had to take naps more frequently?
I think bounce back, the term itself, not to harp on you specifically, I just mean societally, the term bounce back is often used with, let's say, pregnancy or other traumatic things, because giving birth is traumatic, one way or another, right? It is. And we give this illusion that it's whatever the thing we're bouncing back from is, like, we dismiss the difficulty of it. And we like only look at the end result and not the journey that it takes to get to that end result. And it's not fair to the people who have gone through that journey to dismiss it, right? Because that can look like a lot of things. You're dealing with mental trauma of, like, how did I let myself get in this position in the first place, right? And you can be blaming yourself for allowing something to happen. You are then trying to cope and deal with what you're going through. And that it's not like taking a pill and it's gone, right? And you're back to yourself. There's more layers to it, and finding a way to recover in a way that is sustainable isn't a switch that you turn on, right? There's many, many pieces that I feel like we uncover over time, and we change over time, and we learn new things all the time, and we have to give ourselves credit for it. It's like one of those things of you can't just compare yourself to other people. You have to compare yourself to where you were yesterday and 6 months ago and 3 days ago. What have I learned? What have I progressed? How have I done? Because then you are truly able to say, oh my goodness, I can't believe I've come so far. I'm proud of myself for doing this, right? And we can be kind to ourselves instead of saying, well, I should have done this and I should have done that. I should have, gotten this far in my career or this far in my marriage or, bought in that house, like we were talking at the very beginning of the episode. And I think it's really important for us to to give ourselves credit for all of the steps in the journey that it takes us to get to that place. And so it's not a matter of, what are the three things that you did, although there's, three and many other things. But I think one of the most important things is to be kind to yourself, just to speak to yourself in a way that you would speak to others, right? Because we're often worse to ourselves
Yeah.
than we are to people around us. And that'll give you the space to have the energy to, because imagine if, and this is now there's a lot of studies done on it in terms of leadership, that being hard on people doesn't get as much results as being kind and building rapport with people. So what if
Yeah.
we treated ourselves and our self-talk that way? How would that affect your day-to-day life?
I love this. And thank you for calling out the term bounce back, because even as I'm
Mhm.
listening to you speak about it, something really interesting is when we say bounce back, we have an unconscious expectation that it's going to be quick. And when it's not quick, the focus is quite negative. It's why we're not there yet. Whereas being kind
Mhm.
to yourself flips the story, and it's instead of focusing on all the things that aren't happening and why you haven't bounced back and why you're still stuck, it's, well, hang on. I gave myself the grace of a nap today because I'm listening to my body and I'm honoring and respecting it. Go me. I wouldn't have done that in the past. And so you almost start congratulating yourself for the things that you once would have punished yourself for.
And that's beautiful. It's so, and being able to say, I listened to myself today. And it adds up over time. It means that then we have more sustained energy. We don't get as snappy with our loved ones because we're not exhausted. Like those,
Yeah.
those, it happens, right? Like I have this thing when I'm really tired, certain sounds really start to irritate me and I start to get a headache. But if I rest and respect my body, that doesn't happen. And, and it can come in the form of, I don't know about you, but I get hangry. And so if
Yeah.
I listen to that and I express my need to eat, then nobody needs to deal with miserable Alenka, and we'll like adjust our eating schedule accordingly. And it makes everything more pleasant for everyone. And if everyone can kind of learn to do that with each other in a respectful way, that's where these beautiful, healthy relationships thrive.
Yeah, because it has a flow on effect, doesn't it? When we aren't taking care of ourselves, it's not just that it's affecting how we feel inside of our body and the brain fog or the tiredness. It affects the relationships that we have, the way that we show up at work, the way that we interact with colleagues, with our loved ones, with friends, and we snap because our patience
Yeah.
is worn out. And that's not the
And,
version of us
and
that we want to show up.
no, and it's never, we never want to be that person, but it's those boundaries coming up and showing up in a way that isn't very polished, right? What if there's a way that we could do it a little bit more eloquently, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. And that starts with it being kind to yourself first and foremost. Beautiful. So, were there any other things that you then incorporated? First, being kind, which sounds a lot easier said than done. But that's,
Oh
again,
my
that's a
goodness.
practice. That does not happen overnight. It's just baby steps. And
Yeah.
it's not about perfection because, we might be kind one day and not so
Mhm.
kind the next day. And that's okay. But it's just about getting back on this new bandwagon.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of little things that changed. I think a lot of us can relate earlier on in the pandemic. We had a lot of coping mechanisms. So I burnt out in 2021, so it was about a year in. Um, and I had already slowed down on drinking alcohol socially because that's the only time I did. And I just really noticed how it made me feel in terms of like anxiety. I would start to get really anxious the next day in a way that didn't make sense. It wasn't like there was an extra stressor in my life or extra uncertainty. It's just there was something
Hmm.
chemically off in my body, and I could start to associate it with drinking. And so I really slowed down on that. I slowed down on, and then that kind of helped with. getting to bed earlier and getting, 8 or 9 hours of sleep and then waking up the next
Yeah.
morning because you're not going out as much. It's easier to fall asleep. You get a more restful sleep, right? Those things added up. Sleep hygiene is cannot emphasize it enough in the amount of fascinating research there is about how sleep impacts us. When I think sometimes in this hustle culture, we tend to be like, oh, whatever, we'll just cut an hour of sleep. It'll be fine. No, it won't. Like it adds up. It's not,
Yeah.
it really does impact so many things. And having an extra cup of coffee for me just didn't work. It had no effect at all. And I stopped drinking coffee almost entirely. I now drink it when I travel or if I'm at a really nice coffee shop that, you must try the thing. But other than
Yeah.
that, I've really cut out coffee as well. And that has helped with the jitteriness and the go, go, go in the sense that, like, I don't know about you, but I often have bruises on my legs and my hips, and I have no idea how they got there because I was moving so fast. I, hit the side of the table or the counter or whatever. And the coffee would kind
Yeah.
of make that worse. Right. And then that kind of extends to like, injuries as well. But being able to function without the need of coffee. And sometimes that means for me sitting down for half hour and resting after a meal, which is a whole nother conversation that I should probably speak to a nutritionist about. But it's, like there, like there's always room for improvement. But I think that those are some of the things that I've done and really just changed around some of my habits.
Yeah, right. So, what I'm hearing when you talk about the alcohol and the coffee is that you started tuning into how it was feeling inside of your body after you were consuming it. Whereas
Mhm.
beforehand, you were running so fast and doing so many things that you didn't take that extra pause
Yeah.
to actually go, hang on, where's this coming from? It's just, you just want to get on with it. You just got to keep going.
Yeah.
So, it can be as simple as taking a moment to reflect and go, hang on, this isn't feeling right. And where's that coming from? Because that's the only way you can start to then notice a
Mhm.
pattern.
Yeah. And I think that kind of relates back to what I was talking about with like where I was holding stress during burnout, right? And now I notice it if I have like a kink in my neck. What happened that day? What happened? Who was I speaking to? What were the topics discussed? Did I get a rise in my emotion? Did I feel like now I can feel my blood pressure rise? Uh, and
Yeah.
I'm aware of it. But this only came after so much of ignoring it. I remember one moment, it was so fascinating to me. I was doing an intake. This is totally unrelated. I had torn off my knuckle weightlifting, and I, like just the skin, and it went a little black and blue the next day. And I was like, okay, maybe I should go get this checked out. So I went and got it checked out. And during the intake, she was asking me some questions about my health, and I got very animated. And she's like, "Oh, your blood pressure is really high. We should try that again." And so I said nothing. The next time we tried the blood pressure, it was fine. And something in that moment really clicked for me that your emotions and your thoughts and how you're feeling, even if you were just reliving a memory, even if you're just telling a story again, that gets a rise out of you. And it can be also what you're thinking about is reflected in your body. I remember hearing somewhere that your brain doesn't know the difference between a lived experience and a memory. And
Yeah.
so it still goes through the emotions and the feelings in your body. And something about it clicked in a very different way. And I was like, oh, okay. So if I continue to expose myself to these situations, to these people, to these emotions in a way that is unhealthy for me, right? We can talk about like processing emotions and allowing ourselves to not hold on to that. But for me, that's really hard. Everybody can do that differently. Some people just let it brush off their back. But like
Yeah.
some things I'm passionate about, and it's really hard to just let it brush off my back. And so just being in tune with that and paying attention to it to me makes a huge difference because I've been able to limit my exposure to these triggers, if you will, in a way that allows me to still work through and process them and not ignore them entirely, but not build up that tension in my neck or in my jaw or, whatever that in my blood pressure to manage it because those things building up over time for me is what I'm concerned could potentially cause burnout again, right? What can I do instead to manage it in those daily moments and recognize it and not judge myself for it, to be kind to myself in those moments? Really, I'm finding is making a difference because I can feel that I am emotionally more regulated when I allow for that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And for those listening at home, when we're talking about the lived experience versus the imagined experience, that's the crux of anxiety. And because anxiety is the stories that you have in your head from what you're imagining might go wrong, from the worst case scenarios that you have swirling around you, which creates angst in your body. It creates high blood pressure, it creates sweaty palms, it creates shortness of breath. But it's not happening right now. It is just what you are imagining. And so it becomes a process of noticing what those triggers are and noticing what the self-talk is in your mind when you're in those moments. So you can go, hang on, this isn't actually happening. Let's focus on a different scenario. And there's a whole bunch of processes and steps that you can use to overcome that. But that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about the imagination. So, I mean, it sounds like you've made a lot of great progress. And the things that I'm hearing that are really important to remember is that because it's a journey and it's a practice, often these are things that we don't notice until hindsight. We don't always pick up in the moment when we're feeling stressed, but if you're willing to pay attention and reflect just a little bit around what happened just before I felt this way, you then start to join the dots so that it makes it easier moving forward at a certain point for you to realize in the moment. Because now you know what the telltale signs are of your body. You know that for you, maybe feeling stressed is you can feel your blood pressure going up, or you can feel a lot of heat in your body when you're starting to get angry or frustrated. And so catching it in that moment allows you to then go, okay, maybe I'll just put some techniques in place, like breathing or taking a break, walking away, and then coming back to it.
Taking a deep breath is it's such a big deal. Taking like sitting and just taking one deep breath in and out is one of the simplest and easy ways. And I know people talk about it all the time, but I try to remind myself constantly, like just do the one little thing. Or if you're looking at something on your computer and it's really stressing you out and you're not getting anywhere, or you're too tired and you make a bunch of spelling mistakes, just stand up, take a quick break, get a sip of water, and come back to it. Because we have these habits of just like, well, if I just push through, but there's so much power in not forcing yourself to go through something that obviously isn't working, right? Like we wouldn't make ourselves do that in any other way, right? Why do we allow it in this context?
Yeah. And I feel like the overachiever in all of us goes, but we have to just keep trying, or I need to do it now. And we don't feel like, especially when we're stressed or we feel restrained with time, the idea of taking a break almost feels impossible. I don't have the time to take a break. I don't have the time to breathe. I have to do it now.
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting to me, and there's a lot of different studies on this as well, is when we just push through and go and go and go and go, it often takes us longer to do the task than if we took a break and came back to it. We would get the task done a lot more efficiently. And obviously this depends on the person. And I understand deadlines can be brutal and, there's a lot of nuance in that, but I think there is power in understanding. And I mean, I can talk about prioritization. That's like, my, what I've done for a living for of the better part of a decade, but like, what is urgent and important, not just important, because the important things can go. And like, if it's urgent, but not important, let's like, play with it, right? That's like one of those like scoring methodologies to decide what is important. But I think like rigorous and brutal prioritization of tasks, and then also communicating that to, as much as possible, whoever is encouraging you or trying to get you to do that, if that's your boss or whatnot. Really, when you set those boundaries and say, hey, I can do this thing, but I can't do that thing. What is more important? That is like my daily conversation now, right? And it really does make a difference in terms of my capacity and the quality of my work as well.
Okay. Something I want to touch on in you sharing that, because I'm reflecting on how at the start of this episode, you were talking about how your value and your self-worth is wrapped up in what you achieved, that this actually can increase your self-value because you love and respect yourself enough to go, I'm not a machine And I will work to the fullness of my capacity, but I'm not going to burn myself into the ground. That doesn't make you a failure. That doesn't make you weak. That actually makes you a lot stronger and more respectable because you're not a
Yeah,
pushover
and if you think
anymore.
about it, you're not a pushover, right? You think about it in like other contexts where you're like, I don't know, like let's say you're willing to pay for a very expensive hairstylist on a wedding day, right? Like that is a normal thing. And you understand that they're going to be booked out because they know their value and they limit the amount of clients that they take by doing a certain type of price point. And they understand that value. Why don't we do that in our own way in our day-to-day life, right? How can we implement strategies that allow ourselves to like, my value is in doing this. I could do these other things, but I'm really going to do a great job at doing these things. Can we focus that and find other ways to get those things done? Right? There's different ways we can, and it requires creativity, which is almost impossible when you're burnt out. Um, this is why those brilliant ideas come in the shower or in other times when your body is like taking a break.
Which is another reason to take a break because sometimes when we keep pushing, we can't see clearly. And how many times have you just had to step away from something and even just go to the bathroom or get a glass of water, and all of a sudden you get this moment of clarity that is a solution you were looking for? Which again speaks to why sometimes taking a break can actually get you to that finish line a lot faster.
Yeah, it's so true. And this is, they people talk about like, oh, the team couldn't come with a solution all day. We went out for dinner and then all of a sudden it came up, right? Like there is the putting pressure when it's not working. You stand up and walk away for a second. It's makes a huge difference. You see this in like you were talking about it earlier. Let's say if you were arguing with a loved one, standing up and walking away is a valid way of processing it, and then coming back to it in a different state of mind makes a huge difference. And we can carry that lesson in other ways into our day-to-day life.
In addition to taking breaks, in addition to being able to tune into yourself, where are you now in your health and wellness journey? Did you feel like you got the right supports to get you where you need to be?
I am getting there. I feel like I am slowly starting to learn things about myself that I wouldn't have learned if I didn't dig into what I'm doing now. I think it's really important to not give up and not accept whatever it is as the status quo. Granted, some health issues are management, not treatment, and my ankles are management, and they're not going to ever be. I'm never going to be able to do certain things like wear high heels again. I know that's a small thing, but I enjoyed them at one point in my life, right? But that's a limitation. I won't be able to do certain beautiful hikes that are on my bucket list. I that's not going to be safe for me. And that's really hard to accept because I love adventuring and I love going on incredible adventures. I won't be able to do that, right? If anybody knows the Narrows in Zion National Park, I'm really sad I'm going to miss that up. I would look it up if you like beautiful views. But like there are certain things that I just won't be able to do. Um, and that's okay. And I think accepting that is really hard. Accepting that. And so I think I'm in a better place than I've ever been, but it is still a daily practice of being kind to myself and listening to myself and understanding that, hey, it's okay to not be okay in that moment, to be really upset, to be processing whatever that was that you're going through, right? Like when I rebroke my ankle a couple of months ago, the mental toll that it took, and it felt very burnout like in terms of everything just shut down, and emotionally I was just a disastrous mess because I was processing a traumatic event. I broke a bone. That's that is traumatic, and I tried to minimize it to just push through. But that wasn't helping either. So you do have to let yourself feel. But long story short, looking at my body from a more holistic view, and what I mean by that is like taking every part of it into account, including my mind, has helped tremendously. It has really changed how I approach things and my ability to get better and get to a place of management and refocusing the direction of where my life will take me.
So, what does looking at it holistically mean for you beyond just taking breaks?
Yeah, I think it's a mixture of things, right? Like it's a everyone needs different things to make themselves feel whole, right? For me, that is spending time with certain people, right? People that mean that I can be comfortable and be myself with. Oftentimes that's old friends.
Yeah.
When I say old, I mean like, yes, maybe
Yeah.
they're older, but like also you just have that level of comfort with them.
Yeah.
It means having peaceful moments, um, eating certain things. I've learned through a series of blood tests that certain types of foods do better for me. And so I focus on eating that way, taking breaks, not pushing myself to extremes and really prioritizing like, hey, I know I need to get this long list of things done, but my mental energy is on these like only available for these low energy pieces of work, right? Because we have like high intensity brain work and then we have like low intensity brain work, especially if you're working on computers. So, like, maybe I'll just focus on that and then I'll feel good about getting something done. It looks like I do a lot of different types of therapies. It's like, and what I mean by that is I have reprioritized my life. I love eating out, I love trying new foods. I've cut that out almost entirely. And I've used that money that I've saved towards like I started doing red light therapy more seriously. I've been doing private Pilates classes because my ankles are so messed up that I can't do a group environment because I'm going to like the likelihood of re-injuring myself is too high. Um,
Right.
and I've really started to spend money towards different types of things that I know are going to help me. And that is a really hard pill to swallow because it means that like I won't be able to do the types of vacations that I really enjoy. I'm not going to be going out and doing certain things, but it's worth it because I feel better and I feel progress and I see a different version of me. I don't want to say the old me, right? I didn't bounce back to the previous version of me, but I've evolved into a different version that has a more sustainable way of living, right? Because if I kept
Yeah.
doing what I was doing before, I'd end up in the same place. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a great point because I think sometimes when we are looking to bounce back, which one, it doesn't happen the way that we imagine, but it's also we're trying to get back to the old version of ourselves. But the old version of ourselves was the version that wasn't tuning in, that wasn't honoring our bodies, that wasn't taking care of ourselves.
Mhm.
So it has to be a new
Yeah.
version. It has to be something that's better in the way that it's balanced and sustainable, that honors you at the center of it. Yeah. So tell me about what you're creating now and how that this journey has led you to develop Saha. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I have spent most of my career building software for companies, right? From the business perspective, that has been my entire career up until this point. I love learning and absorbing information and going through this journey of trying all of these different things. I wrote a list, it was long in terms of like healing, both from burnout and from my ankle injuries, which, I listened to what the doctor said, it still wasn't working. And I kept re injuring and re injuring for 2 years. um, 2 years
Wow.
a week ago, and I finally, about 7 months in, initially, I was like, you know what? Let me do my own research. Let me figure this out. And so I tried to do all these different modalities and different types of things, and some of them worked and some of them didn't. But I didn't know what I was doing, and no one directed me. No one said like, okay, this is where you're at in your healing journey. This is what you should try next. It was a wild, wild west, if you will. Um,
Yeah.
which is ironic because I live in California, but like so what I realized is I have the ability with my software background and experience to build and design a platform that could connect people based on where they're at today, right? Like, what are you going through today and what do you need? And let's match you to providers that have expertise, that are vetted, that can help you with what you need instead of like going to a physical therapist when you're still not healed, as an example, or like, the therapist I was talking about that told me, oh, you're fine, like, instead of, and I should have been doing something else, right? So meeting you where you're at today and matching you up with a provider that can help you in that moment. And for me, there's so much power in that matchmaking system, aside from how it's going to work. But if you think of the numbers and if you bring in the global kind of population into that as well, there are so many people that need so much help. And there are so many amazing providers that exist out there. Like I was just talking to a TMJ specialist this weekend. I didn't really know these people existed until that. And she helps people when they've, with their jaws. What if you could find somebody that helped you with what you need today? And by creating a global system, there is a more likely chance that your niche need and your set of values will be matched with someone who exists out there. And the providers, on the flip side, are often very good at what they do. But we expect them to somehow be excellent at Instagram and excellent at marketing and like setting up their, Shopify or whatever it is that allows them to process payments. And that's not, like some people can do that and do it well, but other people are, like it drains them from their ability to put that energy into quality work where they can help other people. So that's kind of the ecosystem, if you will. And I think one important part of that is there's a transaction fee that goes to the platform out of each booked appointment. And why I mention that is we are taking a percentage of that every transaction starting from day one and putting it towards a fund. And that fund will be available for people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it, to afford services. So that fund will be available for people to come on the platform and say, hey, I need a therapist, for an example. I can't afford it. And so then we use that fund and help them to be able to find someone that can help them. And for me, what's really beautiful about it is you are seeking help for yourself. And by using the platform, you are finding someone who can help you and also contributing to others who need help.
That's beautiful. It's like paying it forward.
Yeah.
I love this. Thank you. So where can people find out more information about Saha and get connected if they're struggling and looking for supports and don't know where to start? How can they connect with it?
Yeah, so we just launched our social media a couple of months ago. And I say that because we haven't launched the platform yet. We are actively building it, but we do need feedback on what people need and what they are looking for so that we can build it in a way that addresses that, right? I don't want to build this in a vacuum without people's feedback. So you can go to sahacollective.com, so SAHA collective.com, and sign up to be a part of the waitlist and focus groups. You don't have to be on the focus groups if you don't want to. You could just be on the waitlist. And you can also find us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at saha.collective. And if there's, I am starting to build out resources now that are, either people who already exist and that, I'm not affiliated with, but I find their information useful. And I am starting to collect that in a way, and I'm more than happy to share it. And hopefully it can help people in the meantime. But I think part of the platform, we're going to be also creating content that is helpful, as well as, connecting you to practitioners. But I think it's important that information there isn't any gatekeeping involved in providing information for people to access that can help them.
Thank you for sharing your journey about burnout, how it affected you, what you had to learn through it, because I know a lot of people can relate when we want to get things done. We have pressure on all the things that we need to achieve, and we don't always give ourselves a break. And it's a beautiful reminder that we are human and how we feel is going to be different today. It's going to be different tomorrow. And we have to take it moment by moment. And how you speak to yourself is so important. If you wouldn't speak to your friend that way, don't speak to yourself that way. The journey that you went on to heal, to have the right support networks around you. And I know that when you're on your own, it can feel scary. I mean, it's amazing having Google these days because you can find solutions to anything, but at the same time, it's overwhelming because you don't know where to start. So I love this platform that you are creating to support people to have access to the right resources and to really simplify. You don't need to know where you need to be down the track, but you just need to know what you're experiencing right now in this moment and start with that, because as you said, it is a journey. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's not about bouncing back. It's about just loving yourself and giving yourself the space to make yourself a priority.
Saha actually translates to connection or together or endure. And for me, it means we endure in the hard things together.
Thank you. And that's a beautiful way to finish this episode, especially because it's all about leading from love. So this is about reconnecting from a space of love and showing up for one another. Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Alenka, I will put your details in the show notes so people know how to connect with you and reach out. And just want to thank you again for your time and sharing your journey and what you've created with Saha.
Thank you for having me here.